Topic. So warm applause.
Okay.
To Tencredi
Thanks for an amazing
Marrone.
presentation. And thank you so much all for coming, especially after last night's amazing party. I'm even surprised that so many of you are alive. Probably you are ready for these kinds of teachings. We will see how it goes. In reality, I'm going to probably improvise this presentation a little bit, like I pretty much improvise everything as I go. So the slides are probably going to be there to help me remember what it is I'm going to talk about. And depending on how the situation goes, we're probably going to do some breath work because, well, it's probably a very good idea not to provide you with any combat drugs right here. We want to, try and keep it peaceful somehow. Like, we'll see later on in the situation how it goes. So, psychedelic warfare, why did they come up with this research subject? Essentially, I tangentially tend to take my hobbies and my research interests, smash them together, and see if by any chance a field of research appears. So, although I know I don't look like a martial artist, but I do practice martial arts, and I like psychedelics, so I thought, well, certainly combat drugs, stuff like this has always existed. Even today, doping, steroids, this kind of stuff has existed. Why can't it be that there must be cultures who certainly use psychedelics for this kind of purpose? And doing a little bit of digging around, I actually did discover that there are cultures, or there are complete systems or methods which are not very well known, I must say. There's a lot of myth and legend surrounding it, a lot of unclarity, but I won't be delving too deeply into the topic because actually I didn't find that much work. This is really like very, very, very initial beginner's level research, but I still wanted to share what I found with you. So, the first thing was that when it comes to combat or clashing, of course, we have various myths and legends, kung fu warriors, this idea of being able to fly, ninjas, invisibility, the capacity to generate enormous strength, creating iron bodies, overcoming one's physical limitations, which, if you come to think about it, these are all practices aimed in one way or another at extending one's consciousness or one's perception, or being able to interact with matter, with one's own bodily matter in an alchemical way, and actually being able to modify or achieve feats which are not normally done or achievable by an ordinary human being. And powers really have to do with with combat, the capacity to overcome fear, the capacity to generate extra fighting force or extra aggressivity. So the things that I'm going to delve into are a little bit of myth and legend, as I say, physical combat, spiritual combat, which will deal more with the inner world and some aspects of that, recovery and healing, because yes, even in today's world of MMA fighters, because they tend to get a lot of concussions, there are some testimonies that psilocybin effectively helps MMA fighters recover from head concussions, but also from post-traumatic stress disorder, which you're probably already more familiar with. Yes, I actually found a very interesting forum where there were people who were discussing how they sparred or how they fought under the influence of psychedelics on a completely experimental way, and I actually thought it was quite fun to share it with you. And also, I will start with a personal experience, and I will conclude with a personal experience, because ultimately, states of gnosis are what inspire probably most of us, and they did the same with me, with my own practice in martial arts. And I wanted to share a little bit what these insights in martial arts were, also in relation to the testimonies and the research that I actually did when it comes as to the various more traditional traditions. And there's also this relationship with the divine, which is a little bit peculiar, but we'll get into it in a moment. So, practices that usually involve this kind of spirituality for combat. Usually we talk about concepts of chi, of prana, the idea of liberating energy, which is concealed inside the body. There are various practices. As you can see, there's like iron shirt, iron fist. I included tarikan tenaga because it's an Indonesian-Malaysian system, which is extremely efficient. You can even go and Google it, and there's this guy called Mo Morney who really manages to do incredible things with his body armor capacities. And as I was saying, there's also this idea of enhanced bravery and also pain reduction when it comes to physical confrontation, but also hyperperception, What do I mean by hyperperception? You're probably going to be familiar with the idea that even substances like psilocybin and ayahuasca in small microdoses are used for hunting purposes in the jungle. They improve your sensoriality, but it's always a question of being able to calibrate how much you're going to take, so as you don't go too off the board, but you still manage to maintain that sensibility to say, okay, that's pretty much my enemy there. I'm not going to fight that tree down there. I'm going to help my brethren. Now, yes, because I'm a scholar, and I would like to present a bit more of a scholarly perception, yes, my perspective when it comes to spirituality is also strongly rooted in chemistry. So, yes, I do believe that to meditation and any form of spiritual research, there must be some kind of bodily chemical alteration. And the thing that I found interesting is that just like there was this misinterpretation of the effects of mescalines and schizophrenia in the 50s, there are similar misinterpretations when it comes to psychosis or combat frenzy in relation to certain specific cultures. But what I actually found interesting is that this schizophrenia or combat frenzy, contextually speaking, is welcomed just as you would get altered states of consciousness with mystical experiences in a controlled setting. And once again, this idea of the control, of the capacity to know how to dose the entheogen, or it's not entheogen anymore, I actually figured out this fantastic new word, which we will get to briefly, is called. So why did I put Berserk from the anime Berserk? Are you familiar with it? Yes, pretty much? Okay. No, I found it quite inspirational exactly because this particular armor that the main character Gatsu wears provides him with this combat frenzy. And in a certain sense, I felt, yes, he goes out of his mind. This beast is evoked in him. He cannot control himself, and only through the aid of a guide and one of his friends, he can manage to get out of it. But it is this kind of uncontrollable bloodlust. The main source of energy is this fury. It is this bestiality. Why did I put Berserk here? Because of this Berserk here. You probably must have heard that Berserkers would drink or eat Amanita muscaria to go into battle to generate this frenzy. Unfortunately, it's a very nice story, but we don't really have any effective proof. Not that they did not consume Amanita muscaria or they didn't use it for shamanic work or anything like that. We just don't have any necessarily specific proof for the berserkers themselves. And although it's actually quite a nice story, the idea that you can drink something and go into battle and this berserker thing came. The idea that I related it to psychosis is that just as in certain cases you can generate mystical experiences exactly through meditation, you can probably generate these experiences going into battle or working yourself up even without necessarily substances, but still using your own inner body chemistry to achieve that state of frenzy. The berserkers, as far as I know, although they're probably bigger experts than me in the crowd, and I see one down there, you can probably elucidate a little bit later if you're curious. Doesn't matter, don't worry, I'll keep talking. Is that what I found very interesting is that the phenomenon of the berserker, or this induced psychosis that I was talking about before, is not just limited to Scandinavia, but also to this. You probably are familiar with the concept of running amok. Exactly. Now, thanks to my Jeet Kune Do practices, I also study Southeastern martial arts. So Silat from Indonesia and Malaysia, and Kali from the Philippines. So I actually did a little bit of research into the origin of running amok, and it was a very interesting psychotic manifestation, because they would be talking about someone who, at a certain point in their life, usually young men, it's not very much documented in, say, women and children, they would achieve a kind of state of not introspection, but introvertedness. They would retire, they would achieve the state of introvertedness, then all of a sudden they would explode, grab some weapon, and just run around trying to hack down whoever they would find in the village or in the surrounding villages. But the interpretation for it, according to the traditional Malay culture, was that you would never blame the person. Oh yes, and one last thing. Frequently the amok would kill themselves at the end. as a kind of ending to this kind of giant frenzy. And if you think about it, and it's a little bit scary, actually, when you think about it. It's not too dissimilar from certain shootings that you might have seen around the world of people just going crazy all of a sudden. We clearly have more diverse interpretations, and there are various concepts of why this happens. Sometimes it's connected to linguistics, sometimes it's connected to the concept of how empathy is distributed within the community, but I'm not going to get into that too much because it's a whole other body of work that I didn't really go into, and I don't want to misinform you. And yes, so this idea of combat, yes, this was what I was trying to say. They would believe that they were possessed by the evil spirit of a tiger. That's why they were never blamed necessarily themselves for this kind of behavior, but it was still something uncontrollable. And even within the Indonesian tradition, that Marrone that I was mentioning before, he would also talk about the fact that in Borneo, in these areas, you would have headhunters, which were holy warriors, and it's a very, very peculiar figure because in reality, killing a headhunter is somehow against the rules. So if you have to challenge a headhunter to defend your family, you have to get rid of the body. And I was told very interesting story. It was about chopping up corpses, putting them in rice sacks on palms, and then they would just bury them somewhere, and the bodies would vanish. So we finally come to this very nice word, or this very nice term that I didn't know anything about, but it's totally going to become part of my vocabulary from now on, which is therogens. And this word was actually created by Thomas Benjamin in 1999. Right, okay, it's like something like 23, 24 years ago. I had absolutely no idea about anything like this. There's a whole culture behind this. Unfortunately, this is not his book, because I could not find the cover of his book, but this is actually an Italian book that I'm going to stand by Gianluca Toro, Il risveglio della bestia, so the awakening of the beast. And it's actually drugs, therogens, and hallucinogens in traditional cultures, which actually describe how these specific substances, these stimulants, were used to evoke the beast within. So therogen, substances which evoke a fierce animal within yourself. And it's very interesting when it comes to the relationship with entheogen, because with entheogen we're trying to evoke the divine, but since humans are both divine and animalistic, there is the whole series of traditional cultures which, as opposed, let's say, to our modern Western or Westernized culture, did not necessarily eliminate the beast. They just gave it a specific location or a specific place within their culture. So, various therogens. You will find a lot of these therogens for combat in Papua New Guinea, sometimes in Madagascar, partially in Australia. And yes, I actually put a list of, to sound fancy, a little bit academic, with all the words and bits and pieces, and just a nice little, should I get out of the way? Okay, yeah, fine. So, photographs done? Okay, nice. Now, these are a list of plants that effectively are either brewed, made into pastes, they're consumed effectively before battle. And yes, it's true. Various tribes would have their own particular therogens depending on the particular region, but also depending on the functions that they wanted to cover, because there is not one single therogen, and just like you have different stimulants and different drugs to access different altered states of consciousness, you also want to unlock specific powers within you to fight specific kind of enemies or achieve specific tasks. So, these are, for example, the Papua New Guinea warriors, and they would essentially prepare themselves for combat, drinking these substances, and various ethnobotanists, among which I would suggest you go and see Giorgio Samorini. I know it's an Italian word, I didn't print it anywhere, but this is a very cool anthropologist and ethnobotanist. His webpage is also in English. He does extensive research on anything psychedelic, essentially anything. And through the research of him and his colleagues, they give very interesting descriptions of observations of these Papua New Guinean warriors. What would happen is that they would drink these substances that I showed you here before. And what would happen was that they would enter this state of combat frenzy. Their eyes would become bloodshot, and they would start to froth at the mouth, effectively evoking this bestial frenzy aspect in them. When you come to think about it, I always thought, Western mentality, drugs are cheating. When you come to think about, sports, no, we have to be clean, everything like that. They don't really have this concept of sport. I mean, you're trying to kill the other tribe because that cow is necessary, or he stole your wife, or something like that. So essentially, it's anything goes, and you need to get as much power as you possibly can, or controlled power as you possibly can. So the beast is absolutely welcome. In a certain sense, there's also this understanding that if you have to go to battle, you can no longer afford to be a human anymore, to hunt and kill another human. You really have to bring out the inner animal instinct that is maybe contained or controlled within civilization. Another example are the Maasai, and the Maasai were absolutely stunning for me, because the state of frenzy actually has that name. It's Mboshona. I obviously am not pronouncing it correctly. And it would actually define this state of frenzy in which the warriors were effectively ready to go into battle. And they were actually praised, I wouldn't say for taking big quantities, but for being able to resist taking large quantities of the substance and obtaining as big a combat frenzy as possible. And if a warrior did not manage to obtain that, he would be considered a coward. And that would be os sioki, that thing there. As I was saying, in the Maasai in particular, there are various drugs for various purposes. This albizia is for hunting fast animals, so it would give you like extra stamina, extra capacity to maybe run for long distances. Acacia bark is for hunting lions, and I actually found photographs like this lion hunting is effectively a thing. The Moran is just a name for the Maasai warrior, but then they would also have other drugs, especially to go and fight against other human beings and do bits and pieces like that. Ebor Alem is the person whose spear did not taste blood yet, so you would also enter in the state. When you were in a frenzy, your purpose was to make sure that you would effectively stab someone with a spear. It was cooked in animal stomachs and made for the barks of trees. So they would actually have all these sacks in the village, and when the time would come, you would actually drink whatever it is you needed to accomplish that particular mission that day. Interesting thing is that you would only drink these things as an unmarried man. The moment you get married, you stop being a warrior like that, and you actually just stop taking drugs. They don't have a real recreational purpose in that sense, and apparently the only way in which it would be used subsequently is like for the older warriors, they would maybe take a sip when they're having a party just to remember what the old battle frenzy of their youth was like. I decided to put some nice, cool photographs of Maasais, fighting, double stick fighting, and brewing and concocting, and like preparing all their nice little herbs. Usual life. Oh, another thing, which is a complete side note, I actually find it very interesting to compare various martial arts styles, especially these African styles, which almost nobody studies, apart from anything else. They're extremely interesting. And it's another thing, which this is a personal side reflection. What I really like is that you might think that there are many martial arts, but there are some efficient martial arts all over the world. They all follow the exact same principles, all of them. This kind of movement like that, you find it in Western fencing, you find it in samurai sword fighting, you find it all over the world. It's just the most practical, easiest biomechanic you can achieve to express that level of power. Of course, it's limited by the kinds of traditional weapons that they use and the kind of purposes that these weapons are meant for. Moving on into a more spiritual sense, we are all more familiar with this kind of thing. The idea of the shaman warrior was quite fascinating for me. Effectively, this idea that you would go into this underworld, but my interpretation in this particular case derives way more from Joseph Campbell's hero journey. So it's this idea that psychedelic warfare is not just in the physical plane, it's also in the metaphysical plane, whether it's within yourself. Carlos Castaneda, whether you want to consider his work authentic, yes, no, honest, whatever it is, certainly had something to say about it, discusses this idea of being able to go into yourself, into these other realms, being able to gather power, being able to somehow dodge power for the purpose of liberation more than acquiring power, and in one way or another unlocking, we would probably call them traumas or things like that. But another thing that I also remembered recently, which is more close to the Italian tradition of the Benandanti, which I thought was actually quite interesting, is that the Benandanti tradition had this, let's say, maybe psychedelic or lucid dream warfare, where certain people would transform into werewolves and hunt witches in the astral plane, and these things were probably somehow informed also by psychedelic substances, but this is also something that we will have to go a little bit, I'll have to study a little bit more. But in connection to Carlos Castaneda, I also found that mescal bean is used for this kind of combat purpose. There's a whole reason why mescal bean is called as such. There's a whole historical anthropological reason. Mescal bean is only attributed to northern Native American Indians, and it's like a derivative of mezcal. It's just called mescal bean for purely communicative purposes amongst Western scholars. You can see it's like this. And these are the tribes that we have recorded which effectively used mescal bean for combat purposes. For example, Potawatomi, I hope I pronounced it correctly, they used it in two particular ways, and which is why the dosage is so important. They would use it both on the spears, on the tips of arrows, to inflict deadly blows, but they would also use it on themselves, exactly to achieve the same state of frenzy, mouth throttling, or blood eye injection, and charge into battle furiously, because ultimately, we got to admit, no one wants to die, and no one likes the idea of being stabbed by someone or like having a rock hurled at you. Certainly the drug is going to help you in some way. And Omaha and Kickapoo as well also use this mescal bean for the same reasons. Which brings me to another guy, which I found incredibly interesting, which is this man, which also informed a big part of my research. And I'm just going to give some details here in case, for some bizarre reason, you don't know him, but he's extremely famous. And no, he's the specialist that did research in all kinds of African martial arts, but also did in-depth research in the use of fly agaric within African tribes for combat. I was so startled to discover that Zulu tribes, or the Zulu Empire, effectively used fly agaric in combat to achieve this super combat frenzy. And another thing that brought me quite close to Kilindi Iyi is we obviously don't know 100% of the history is correct, as he says that all martial arts fundamentally come from an entheogen, or were inspired by some kind of entheogen. Obviously, this kind of thing is debatable, but I would say to a certain extent, or no, not to a certain extent, I can say quite clearly in myself that certainly fly agaric does inspire or give insight into combat. But I will explain a little bit later what I mean. Yes, he was talking about the fact that plenty of African tribes would use these substances, that, well, he would also talk about, speaking of psychic warfare, he would travel to all these worlds, like there was the insect kingdom, there were all these other kingdoms, and he would like try and deal with all these entities, bring back knowledge concerning the martial arts, and obviously trying to share it as much as possible, and explaining that effectively, yeah, these were gifts, these were inspirations following this stoned ape theory, even this idea of being able to fight. And this is a very nice thing that he brings up, and I'm surprised that more people don't talk about it. They don't effectively talk about the combat aspect. that drugs bring. Shamans are warriors. You have to confront death somehow. You have to integrate the shadow as if you want to call it in some way like that. You can't just always hope to go by the easy way. Violence is effectively a language, and trying to suppress it is not really gonna help. In any case, I suggest that you go and watch his videos. He was at a Breaking Convention, and I saw some of his absolutely excellent work, and I'll probably keep doing, collecting some research on it. On a more sorry note, there's this. Because yes, this is also a theoreogen, not very pleasant, and which is giving us some very bad memories. I tried to make it a little bit lighthearted when you pop 5 Pervitin pills, but the battle was called off and you're just standing there. Yes, effectively Pervitin, or like happy chocolate or tank chocolate, was a thing which, beyond the horrors of war as we know, also led to incredible horrors for the people involved in it. Not only were people shoved in tanks and just going forward without knowing exactly where they were going, but as far as I know, similar episodes happened with submarines. Like people in like mini one-place submarines were just shot somewhere in the Atlantic or in these oceans and maybe just got stuck underground because they didn't know where they were supposed to go and just died there. Horrifying. But on another funny note, it was also used for migraine. I don't know, but you know, these poor housewives from the 40s, like, yes, working all day, and so like you need Pervitin and stuff like that. Contemporary experiments. Unfortunately, I cannot read this very well, but this was actually something that came out of a forum, and I thought it would be fun to read some effective direct accounts of people who effectively took psychedelics and decided to fight each other to see what would happen. I mean, we all know bar fights on alcohol pretty much and how those end. These are a little bit different. So, question. Has anyone sparred with another while on psychedelics? I had a little over 3 grams in tea, and about 3 hours in, me and my brother sparred. I practice Tai Chi, and he mostly uses judo. However, he has lost interest in hand-to-hand and gone towards the use of weapons recently, and is practicing kendo among other things. Fine. Anyways, I have never used Tai Chi to spar before, and my go through learning it was stress relief more than anything. We are circling each other, and he's moving very rigidly, showing a lack of experience. I was feeling quite a feeling. I could not feel my external body at all, yet I was in constant fluid motion. My focus was on every part of his body and what he was doing. I was feeling the energy shifts, more or less. Finally, he attacked, and my body reacted accordingly. As he was striking forward, I flowed to the left, and then forward, placing my hand on his chest and shoving him a few feet backwards. His girlfriend gasped, and the look on my brother's face was priceless. That was like pretty epic, right? I was rather astonished myself. I had never even attempted to do something such as this. We continued for a while, with me just pressing him away. When he would get close, he never did adjust to my technique, and I remained untouched. The amazing thing was how keen my awareness of it all was, such a feel for the movement without any real experience. Truly an experience for me, and one that I wish I could repeat, but who knows? This is already one kind of experience that you can have. Maybe already the fact that it was 3 grams can inform a little bit on what was going on. We don't know exactly who or how big. Well, fighters always like to enlarge their stories, but, you know, we don't know exactly what it was. But I found that it was like a very, very interesting situation that you would try something partially so numbing on one side, but so perceptively expanding. In a certain sense, I would imagine that maybe something like this could have worked to a certain extent. Possibly. We all know what the effects of it are. Maybe it could have been something like that. So, but they don't all go as well as this. I went to my kickboxing class while on shrooms. It was great. I ended up fighting an invisible enemy. Another one. Last time I took some 5-ACO DMT. Ha. and my buddy ate some mushrooms. We put on these huge padded boxing gloves and went at it. It was fun, and we really got into it, not in a violent way, but the feeling, the flow, and having fun dodging shot. But we both found out we weren't in the best shape and ended up totally winded for a while. We had to wait like 10 minutes before smoking some pot after that. We've already got a different effect in this case. And then finally, I think that martial arts and mushrooms are a great mix, if handled correctly. Wise words. I remember one time I was tripping balls and hanging out with my sober brother. We were both happy and energetic and decided to just start messing around and roughhousing a bit. I was about 17 at the time, having about 4 years of sport jiu-jitsu experience. About 5'8", weighing about 130 pounds. My brother, 21 in the red corner, blah, 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 is about 5'11" and weighing about 190 pounds then, possessing basic boxing skills. It was absolutely amazing. My body and mind were completely connected and in sync. At every one of my brother's advances, I was able to move out of the way or deflect his energy away from me and turn it against him. Everything moved very slowly, and my sense of sight played a very menial role. It was all about manipulation of energy, feeling where the source of it was and where the best place to put it would be. I was in a complete control over the fight and untouchable by my opponent, which is a great feeling when you're outweighed by 60 pounds. But anyways, sparring and tripping can be a great experience, as long as there is no vicious animosity amongst the fighters. Otherwise, things will get out of control and someone will get hurt. I do recommend it if you have no partner. Next time you trip, just shadow box, focus on your form and your breathing. You can really learn a lot and have a lot of fun. Which leads me to this, which is my own personal experience effectively with psychedelics and martial arts. How did it happen? As usual, it was just by chance. Because the story goes like this, and I think that the set and setting also proved to be quite fundamental because I was in my kitchen and I figure out that getting high in my kitchen is amazing because kitchens are usually a place of high creativity because you're cooking in them, and I always get brilliant ideas or like zone out or write stuff down while I'm in the kitchen. And I was there, and I was maybe cooking something, and I think I picked some mushrooms. It was probably like a year ago in the Czech Republic. Psilocybe bohemica and arcana are very good, decent mushrooms, in case you're interested in picking them or going to the Czech Republic for a trip. And I was hanging around there, and obviously the setting is very, very important because I happened to be thinking about martial arts in that particular instant. The dose that I had was probably a threshold dose, so I wasn't exactly out of my mind, but I was effectively in this state of embodiment. I was partially excited because I was really trying to formulate something or solve a problem when it came to martial arts, because what I was trying to figure out is, and what I think a lot of people in the world of martial arts have a problem with, is how do you apply the techniques in real combat, or how are these things supposed to work? And I couldn't figure out why my teacher was so good and why he moved in ways completely different than what he was effectively teaching us, yet still being able to maintain the techniques that he was teaching us. And I was just standing there, and all of a sudden, this conception of geometry came to me. So I could feel that the principles are that in combat, you have this kind of triangle pointing forwards. It's the direction of your arms. And you have this geometry of the center line, like Bruce Lee would say. And even our body is made at these right straight angles. Just like footwork works at angles, our bodies are structured at angles as well. But our natural movements are also circles or figures of 8. So the more I was working with it, the more I effectively saw, okay, so the techniques are there just to specify one particular movement within one particular context, but you're supposed to expand the concept of that movement to the totality of the geometry of your body and one else's body. The techniques are just a guideline. So essentially, in a certain sense, I forgot all the techniques, but I more or less figured out the geometry of combat. When I like to talk about the geometry of combat, I also like to refer to Pythagoras, whom some of you may or may not know was a boxer as well. in ancient Greece, and apparently his theories of geometry and the triangle were effectively applied to his boxing style. So we can even say that boxing is somehow esoteric, and it follows Pythagorean principles, if we want to add a little bit of spirituality in here and there. But this is effectively what happened to me. I could all of a sudden see these geometries, and all of a sudden I could say, yes, all these techniques ultimately fall within these shapes. This is probably the insight, or at least very low-level insight, that someone like Kilindi Iyi was trying to transmit or was trying to explain. And I can assure you, effectively, it does work if you happen to do a martial art or something like that. Oh, I would also point out that it wasn't with anyone. I was just hanging around alone. So it was this kind of introspective, self-reflective kind of experience. Because if I were with someone, maybe I'd have to like compromise or do something like that. And as you could see before, sometimes it works. Sometimes it's just weird. Sometimes you don't even feel like it. It's like, oh, I don't want to work. No, I don't want to work. But the other thing that came to me that wasn't in that particular occasion was actually in Ozora last year. And I was on MDMA and I was on the main central stage. And in that moment, I was just listening to the music. And I entered this kind of state of trance where everybody was dancing. And I just had this like, I got to figure out something right now. Yes, it's rhythm. The other thing important for combat is rhythm. Through the use of psychedelics, I more or less gained this insight into the use of rhythm and geometry, which somehow really does inform a lot of my experiences and a certain growth in training. It doesn't mean that like, now I can fly or kung fu fight. No, you still have to get that insight and use it into your own training system, and you can also do all these kinds of bits and pieces. But it was effectively there. Yes, psychedelics, once again, are there to help you unlock problems or solve problems of this kind. So I would say that if someone were to ask me what martial arts is about, is the capacity to move energy with geometry and rhythm, which is also in a certain sense very, very similar to dance, with obviously completely different purposes. Tomega Theogen, just to make a little joke, is the end of this presentation, and